May 15th, 2025, Hillary Step, Mount Everest. 8,800 meters above sea level. Palchen Tamang had spent 8 hours trying to move one man 100 meters. Sherpas have guided climbers on Everest for over 100 years. Not once in a heated gym, not on a training wall, not anywhere with a safety net below them. They fix every rope on the mountain before a single paying client clips in. They cross the Khumbu Icefall, a river of moving, cracking glacial ice, up to 20 times in a single season while their clients cross at 4 or 5. They carry 80-pound loads to camps at 7,000 meters. Over 100 Sherpas have summited Everest 10 times or more. One of them, Appa Sherpa, has stood on top more times than any human being alive. He has since said he wants to ensure that no one ever feels obligated to guide on Everest again. But when Palchen Tamang finally walked away from a client who refused to turn back, the internet called him a murderer. The part that bothers me about this story is that it was never just one Sherpa and one bad client. It was a chain of economics, of cultural pressure, of a legal system that has never once protected the people doing the dying. This is why Sherpas are expected to die, so rich tourists don't have to. Welcome to Tourist Tragedies. To understand what Sherpas actually do on that mountain, you need to understand what happened on May 10, 1996. Lopsang Jangbu Sherpa was the lead sirdar, the head guide, for Scott Fisher's Mountain Madness expedition. The day before the summit attempt, Lopsang carried an 80-pound load from Camp 3 to Camp 4. 80 pounds is roughly the weight of a full-grown Labrador retriever. He carried it at an altitude where the air holds less than a third of the oxygen available at sea level. 30 pounds of that load was other team members' personal gear. Not climbing equipment, personal gear. Items they chose not to carry themselves. And honestly, when you understand what that costs a human body, what it actually takes to do that, it becomes very difficult to use the word guide for what Lopsang was. The word doesn't cover it. The next day, the storm hit. Fisher began failing near the south summit. Lopsang did not radio for help. He did not wait. He physically dragged Fisher downward, not guided him, dragged him. He stayed with Fisher and another stricken climber for hours in the open, at altitude, in a storm, until Fisher himself told Lopsang to leave and descend alone. Fisher died on that mountain. Lopsang got down. Lopsang Jangbu Sherpa was 24 years old. How does someone become this? The Khumbu Valley sits in northeastern Nepal, high enough that the air is thin even at its lowest point. The people who have lived there for generations, the Sherpas, were not climbers by tradition. They were farmers and traders. They grew barley and potatoes. They moved goods across high mountain passes between Nepal and Tibet. The altitude was not romantic to them. It was simply home. The first time Sherpas appeared on a Western mountaineering expedition was in the 1920s when British teams began attempting Everest. They were hired as load carriers, altitude adapted, strong, and willing to work for wages that were modest even by the standards of the region. Nobody asked them whether they wanted to climb. By 1953, something shifted. When Edmund Hillary and Tsering Onchu stood on the summit together, the outside world celebrated it as a British triumph. After the climb, the British team stayed at the British Embassy in Kathmandu. The Sherpas were housed in the garage, the same night, the same city. Tsering Onchu slept in the garage, but the summit had happened. And in the villages below, a generation of young Sherpas grew up knowing that one of their own had stood on top of the world. That was the moment the mountain stopped being just a workplace and became something harder to name, a proof of something. A source of identity that no one had planned for and no one quite knew what to do with. Lopsang Jangbu Sherpa was born in 1971, 18 years after that summit. He grew up in a valley where climbing was already woven into daily life, where the men who came back from Everest were the ones whose families ate. The economic calculation was not complicated. The wages from a single climbing season could do what years of farming could not. By the time Lopsang was in his early 20s, he was already one of the most respected sirdars on the mountain, not because anyone had pushed him into it, but because he had grown up in a world where the mountain was the only ladder available, and he had decided to climb it. By the 1990s, Everest had become a business, and for the Sherpas of the Khumbu, it was working. Over 100 of them had summited the mountain 10 times or more. Experienced guides were earning wages that, by local standards, represented real financial security. Some had started their own trekking agencies. Others were sending children to school for the first time in their family's history. The Nepalese government was collecting millions in permit fees each season, and entire communities below base camp were being rebuilt around the climbing economy. In the villages along the trail to base camp, you could see what the seasons had built. Children in school, new roofs on old stone houses. Families who had spent generations wondering how to make the land yield enough now had a different kind of certainty. If the season went well, the year would be okay. Tsering Onchu was 33 years old. He had a wife, Nima Doma, and young children at home in the Khumbu. He crossed the Icefall every season. He fixed ropes in the dark before the clients woke up. He carried loads to camps that most paying climbers could barely reach on their best day. He was, by every measure, the main pillar of his family. That was how Nima Doma would later describe him. The main pillar. Mingma G. Sherpa was building a reputation as one of the most capable high-altitude guides of his generation. 9 Everest summits, a family proud of what he had built. His father climbed too. And Lopsang, at 24, was already the most trusted Sirdar on Scott Fisher's expedition. Fisher had chosen him specifically. That meant something in the Khumbu. It meant you were the one people called when the conditions got serious. In those years, the mountain felt like a partnership. Hard, underpaid by any Western standard, dangerous by any standard at all. But a partnership. The clients came from America and Europe and Japan with their permits and their $65,000 checks. The Sherpas brought everything else: the knowledge, the rope, the physical capacity to function at altitudes where most humans simply stop working. Both sides needed each other. In the evenings at base camp, photographs were taken. Summit certificates were signed. Western climbers who came back year after year requested the same Sherpa guides by name. That meant something too. For a generation of families in the Khumbu Valley, life was quite simply the best it had ever been. The children were small, the houses were warm, the season always came around again. None of them knew that on the morning of April 18, 2014, everything that felt stable about this world was about to end. April 18, 2014. The sun is not yet fully up. It is 06:45 in the morning on the southern side of Mount Everest. The paying clients had not yet arrived for the season. The mountain was not yet open for climbing. The route was not yet ready. That was why the Sherpas were there. A group of 25 men, mostly Sherpa guides and high-altitude workers, are moving through the Khumbu Icefall. They are not on a summit attempt. They are not testing their limits. They are doing what they do before every climbing season begins: fixing ropes, preparing the route, hauling loads of gear upwards so that the clients, when they arrive, will find everything already in place. This is the part of the job nobody photographs. The Khumbu Icefall sits at approximately 5,800 meters above sea level. It is the first major obstacle on the standard Everest route from the south. To reach the higher camps, every climber, client and Sherpa alike, must pass through it, but they do not pass through it the same number of times. A client crosses the Icefall 4 or 5 times in a season. A Sherpa crosses it 15 to 20. That morning, the 25 men moving through the ice were on one of those crossings, carrying loads of gear for commercial expedition groups, for clients they had never met, in conditions that, on the surface, gave no obvious warning. One detail about that morning has stayed with everyone who studied it. The group was exactly where they were supposed to be, following exactly the route they had been given, doing exactly what they had been hired to do. That was the problem. To understand what happens next, you need to understand what the Khumbu Icefall actually is. Most people picture a mountain as solid, fixed, something you climb because it stays still while you move. The Khumbu Icefall is the opposite of that. The Icefall is a section of the Khumbu Glacier, a river of ice that flows, slowly but constantly, down the southern face of Everest. Because the terrain beneath it drops so steeply, the glacier fractures as it moves. It breaks into enormous blocks of ice called seracs. Some of these seracs are the size of office buildings. They lean against each other at angles that look impossible. They crack, they shift, they collapse without warning and without sound until they are already falling. The route through the Icefall requires climbers to walk directly beneath these towers of ice. There is no way around them. There is no safer path. You thread between them, over them, and under them, trusting that the serac above you right now will hold for the 30 seconds it takes you to clear it. In the early morning hours, the ice is at its most stable, the temperature is lowest, the glacier moves most slowly. This is why Sherpas begin their crossings before dawn. They are not being reckless, they are being precise. The early start is the safety margin, but a glacier does not negotiate. It does not respond to schedules or seasons or the fact that 25 men are directly in its path. It moves on its own time, for its own reasons, and it gives no warning when it decides to move faster. At 06:45 on the morning of April 18, 2014, the ice above the group gave way. The ice does not fall slowly. A serac the size of a building does not creak first. It does not give the men below a moment to run. 1 second, the route is clear. The next, it is not. At 6:45, the avalanche releases. A wall of ice and snow moves down the southern face. It does not slow, it does not choose. At 5,800 meters, in the space of seconds, the route disappears. The men are working, they are carrying loads. Some are clipped into the fixed lines they came to install. The ice arrives before any of them can process what is happening. The sound reaches base camp before the dust settles. Then, the mountain goes quiet. 25 men are buried under the ice. Rescue teams reach the site within the hour. They dig. They call out names. Some of the men they find are breathing. Some are not. 3 are buried so deep they are never found at all. By the end of the day, 16 men are confirmed dead. 16 Sherpas who had woken up before dawn, eaten breakfast, and gone to work on a mountain that was not yet open for the season. They were hauling loads of gear for commercial expedition groups, for clients they would never meet, on a route they had crossed dozens of times before. 3 of them are still on the mountain. Tsering Onchu was 33 years old. His wife, Nimadoma, was at home in the Khumbu when the news came. She had young children, a house, a life built around the assumption that her husband would come back at the end of the season. He did not come back. "What can you do?" she said afterward, "when the main pillar of your house is not there? The children were small. I was worried how I will educate them, how we will sustain ourselves." The Nepalese government offered the families of the dead 40,000 rupees. That is approximately $400. A guided Everest expedition that season cost a client anywhere between $30,000 and $120,000. The value the system assigned to a Sherpa life, in the immediate aftermath of the worst single-day loss in Everest history, was $400. In the days that followed, a number of Sherpas boycotted the remainder of the climbing season, not because they were told to, because 16 of their colleagues were dead and the mountain was still open for business. Mingma G. Sherpa, who lost his father in the avalanche, said years later that the number of Sherpas willing to work on Everest had dropped significantly. "Now, companies have to go look for Sherpas," he said. "In the past, Sherpas would have to go around looking for work." The mountain did not close. The next season, the clients came back. When you lay the facts in sequence, a terrifying picture begins to form. It starts with the route. Sherpas cross the Khumbu Icefall up to 20 times in a single season. Their clients cross it 4 or 5. The most dangerous section of the mountain is crossed 4 times as often by the people earning the least. That is not an accident of the terrain. That is a structural feature of the business model. Then comes the money. A guided Everest expedition costs a client between $30,000 and $120,000. The Sherpa who personally guides them to the summit earns roughly $4,000 for the entire season. Western guides doing the same job earn around $50,000. The gap is not a negotiating oversight. It is the architecture of the industry. Then comes the insurance. After the 2014 avalanche, the maximum payout to a Sherpa's family if he was killed was raised to 1.5 million Nepali rupees. That is 11,250. Against a 65,000 expedition fee paid by the client, that is the number the system assigned to a Sherpa's life. And then comes the legal vacuum. There is currently no enforceable right for a Sherpa to refuse a dangerous assignment. No liability protection for a guide who descends without a client who refuses to turn back. No statute in Nepali mountaineering law that explicitly covers what Palchen Tamang had to decide alone at 8,800 meters in the dark. Investigators who have studied the Everest economy call this a 2-tier system. The climbing business, as Outside Magazine documented, values life on a two-tiered basis, Westerners at the top, Sherpas on the bottom. It is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. Every one of these factors was in place on the morning of April 18, 2014. Every one of them is still in place today. A mountaineer and journalist who spent years studying the Everest economy put it simply, "They're making a living while we're having a good time," he said. "And no amount of money is enough to justify what they're asked to do." 16 men died on April 18, 2014, not because of one mistake and not because of bad luck. They died because every layer of the system, the economics, the route exposure, the legal vacuum, and the cultural expectation that Sherpas will absorb whatever the mountain demands, lined up perfectly for a tragedy that was entirely predictable and entirely preventable.